Well, hello and welcome. My name's Amber Johnstone, and I'm with the ALS Association. Thank you for joining us for this first installment of the 2026 Empowering Your ALS Journey webinar series. The goal of this series is to empower you to live fully and with purpose, regardless of where you are on your ALS journey. The title of today's webinar is Planning Ahead, Taking Control of Your Communication Journey, which I think is a very appropriate way to kick off the new year. Your voice matters, and we hope this discussion will help you feel empowered to make a communication plan today. There are a few things to know before we get started. First, please know that you're muted and not on camera, so you can relax and enjoy the presentation. We will be using the chat feature today to allow you to participate in the discussion. So please take a moment now and locate the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. As we're waiting for others to join, you can use the chat feature found in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen to say hi and let us know what state you're joining from. You'll also see polling questions pop up a few times during today's presentation. Just select your answer and submit. I'll also be sharing a QR code for those who find that easier, and there will be a link to the QR in the chat once we launch each poll question. There will be time at the end of this webinar for questions, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. All messages submitted will only be viewable by the host and the panelist. We'll review and answer these questions with our speaker at the end. We do have a short survey we'll ask everyone to complete after the webinar. The survey will appear in the bottom of your browser once the webinar ends. The survey helps us to know your thoughts on this presentation and topics you'd like us to consider in the future. Lastly, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on our Empowering Your ALS Journey webinar page within about a week. This is also where you may view recordings of previous webinars. So joining us today to present is Haley Holland and a couple of our team members to help moderate the discussion. Haley is the director of AAC at the ALS Association, where she leads national programs focused on improving access to communication supports for people living with ALS. She is an occupational therapist and project management professional whose work bridges clinical experience with large-scale program development. Across her career, she has cared for individuals with complex neurological conditions, implemented large training and technology rollouts, and championed patient-centered innovation. She is passionate about empowering individuals with ALS, supporting early communication planning, and designing programs that raise the standard of AAC care nationwide. We thank Haley and her team for taking the time to talk with us today, and I'll hand it over to Haley now, and I'll hop back on with questions and answers at the end.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I think that this topic is so fitting, talking about planning ahead, taking control of your communication journey. But before we get started, I want to talk about kind of where our discussion is going to go today. So today we're going to talk about several different options for technology for your communication, but please know that every person is incredibly different. I do not care if you walk away from this talk knowing what devices' names are or even what a device does. I want you to walk away knowing that if you have a problem, technology likely has a way to solve it. I also want to introduce my team. I have Reagan Barton and Jill Adlin here. They're two members of my four-member team at the ALS Association who are helping those access AAC and AT throughout the organization. So I want to encourage you to please ask them questions throughout this conversation. You could do that in the Q&A section or in the chat. And I want to encourage questions because that's what today is all about. And if I could have you walk away with anything today, it would just be to lean into your resources, be able to ask questions, for example, putting it in the chat, and then staying open to new possibilities. Again, I don't necessarily care if you know what the names are and what's out there. Just know that there's likely something out there that can help you. I want you to be empowered to take control of your care and communication, plan for your voice changes, options for saving your voice early, tips for using your phone and tablet effectively, and then how technology can help you manage your surroundings, simple tools for everyday communication, and then Most importantly, resources for continued learning and troubleshooting. And I made my scary AAC monster, but as you will know, AAC doesn't have to be scary if we can make a plan and feel confident about it. So first, I want to talk about kind of what communication looks like throughout the ALS journey. In the chat, my team is going to be dropping in another webinar that was done last year by my amazing colleague, Kate, who talks about speech communication and voice preservation. It goes way more in depth than I'm going to today about the changes in your voice. But kind of what we expect is that you'll have a gradual decline in speech, excuse me. And then early on, we see like mild slurring, fatigue while speaking, increased difficulty with articulation and volume kind of comes in that middle stage. And then during the late stages, a natural loss of speech. One thing to note is that 80 to 95% of people with ALS are unable to meet their daily communication needs using natural speech. And so one thing that you may know is that speech patterns or speaking rate typically occur before a decrease in someone being able to understand your speech. I also want to acknowledge that this can be a very emotional journey for people. I read a very amazing article that talks about how communication is the essence of human life, right? And people talk about how the frustration and sadness of both loved ones and patients going through ALS, that's often one of the biggest emotional hurdles to get over is the loss of speech and communication. I also want to acknowledge that it's difficult for speakers with ALS and their family members, and sometimes medical personnel, to acknowledge that while you still have remaining speech, it is very difficult to turn towards assistive technology and AAC supports. But my biggest thing to walk away with today is to plan for early communication support in order to maintain independence and connection. And I'll give you a lot of research why that is very important later. So we talk a lot about communication, but what is communication? Communication can happen in several different ways. We have verbal communication like I'm doing right now. Natural speech often is what people use early in their stages of ALS. You may also have whispering or reduced volume speech, or you may have speech with assisted devices such as a voice amplifier. We're going to get to these alternative methods, but these are speech generating devices, text-to-speech apps, communication boards, which are our low-tech options, and then also nonverbal communication, which can happen with body language, facial expressions, eye gaze, head movement. Written communication, so depending on what type of ALS you have, some people have more hand function than they do speech function. And so people use things like boogie boards or typing on a keyboard or even adapted keyboard in mice out there. And then also symbolic and visual communication. So when we talk about communication, I think it's really important to acknowledge that alternative communication use is associated with higher quality of life scores and reduced caregiver burden. I've also mentioned this stat, and I'm going to keep on saying this, that 80 to 95% of people with ALS experience significant speech impairment during the disease. Approximately 95% of individuals with ALS who lose speech can benefit from AAC, but actual adoption rates can vary. And we're going to talk about some of those barriers to getting AAC later. And then of technology that we could provide for those living with ALS, eye gaze technology is the most common, and about 70% of late stage users rely on eye gaze technology. So I've already used some of these acronyms, so apologies. We, in the medical system, we love a good acronym. And I wanted to kind of spell out some of those for you today before we got too deep into our talk. So one of the biggest ones is AAC. I am the director of AAC, so I use this term quite a bit during my daily life, but AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So augmentative means to help support or supplement verbal speech. Alternative is another way to communicate. And then sometimes you may hear this referred to as AugCom. We also have speech generating devices, and sometimes people use speech generating devices and the term AAC interchangeably. These are technically different. Speech generating devices are the devices that generate speech, and AAC can be a whole host of solutions for someone. An SLP, or a speech language pathologist, is the professional who helps with your AAC needs, language needs. They also work on swallowing disorders, and these are the people who help recommend appropriate communication tools. They can help train individuals and caregivers on how to use these effectively. Assistive technology. Oops, sorry. Assistive technology is devices or software that can help with communication, mobility, and daily tasks. An application or an app is something that helps perform specific tasks, and it's a software program. And then operating systems are main software that manages the device hardware. So this is what I think of when I think of Windows. Are you an Android user or an iPhone user? Those operating systems are different. So next we're going to get into a little bit of voice preservation. So there are different types of voice preservation. The first one is voice banking, which you've probably heard of, I hope. This creates a synthesized voice for you based on samples of your speech. We have message banking, which is the process of recording meaningful phrases. This is important because it's set in your original voice with your original kind of inflection. And then voice cloning is AI technology that creates a replica of a person's voice. In the chat, my team is going to drop a wonderful article that has all the different details about different types of voice preservation and the resources out there. I will say that voice preservation is often overlooked when we talk about communication. I'm going to show y'all a video of an amazing story where someone was able to clone their voice when they did not have the opportunity.
For her synthetic voice were hard.
It was a very difficult time, but things did improve greatly when I could use a computer.
It's a very posh voice you have there, Sarah. That's your old synthetic voice. Give me a blast of your new voice.
Hello, this is my voice. It's a kind of miracle, really.
Wow, that just sounds really different.
After such a long time, I couldn't really remember my voice before MND. When I first heard it again, I felt like crying, and it was very emotional.
How close is it to your original speaking voice, do you think?
This is your mommy too. You want it white hair with you?
So I think it's pretty good, although I wonder if I would sound older now.
Oh, well, it's no harm in being a bit Peter Pan, I reckon, when it comes to a new voice. Why not?
My carers and friends love my voice, which is really nice. I feel like myself, and I don't sound like a robot. People didn't know I was Cockney with a slight lisp. I feel a bit more exposed because I didn't really like my voice before and wondered if people looked down at me because I was from the East End. I don't care about that now, and I'm glad to be back.
Let me play you the video that Sarah sent me.
Simon Poole is part of the team that recreated Sarah's voice.
Sarah had a small recording of her voice from over 20 years ago on a VHS tape. Only 8-second sample, and it was a very low quality recording.
You know, I gave her a bottle one night.
Despite it not being perfect, that is good enough for an AI voice creation tool to work with. It just needs a small sample of your voice, and then it knows what voices normally sound like, and it can use that to fine-tune its model to sound like your voice.
Let's hear the final version.
I thought, you know, I gave her a bottle one night and she was so much happier.
That is incredible. Really incredible. For Sarah's children, it's been a revelation. Is it what you expected?
No.
What did you expect?
I didn't know she was Cockney. I didn't know well, I knew she was East London, but I didn't know she had a Cockney accent. It's taken me a while to process it, but really.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. Let me get my presentation back up. But I think that's just a great example of how AI and technology is just advancing the way. I also want to share a link in the chat about 11 Labs and Bridging Voice. So you can get an 11 Labs, which is what she used here, voice cloning for free. If you're able to sign up through Bridging Voice, they offer a great program for that. So despite all of the things that we talked about, voice banking adoption is quite low. So this was in 2016. I'm really hoping this number is higher, but only 10 to 15% of individuals completed voice banking. I think there's several reasons for this. A lot of it is just lack of awareness or late referral. So I have a poll for y'all to try. This is, have you completed voice or message banking? So we're gonna go ahead and start the Zoom poll, and you can go ahead and respond on the chat if you don't have access. Let's say you're using your eye gaze device and it's not working, you're also welcome to respond in the chat. But have you completed voice or message banking? And so the answers are yes, no, and I didn't know I needed to. And I'm really hoping that we are higher than that 10 to 15% in this group. While you're answering the poll, I wanted to give you a little bit of time for that, but I also want to talk about a couple of resources. So the first one is a link that we're going to drop in the chat about double dipping. So Boston Children's introduced double dipping, where a single recording session supports both voice banking and message banking. This method minimizes fatigue while maximizing outcomes, and it helps also flexibility in your speech and personalized recorded message. There's also message banking templates that we're going to drop into the chat too. I think these are really wonderful because message banking, it can be quite difficult. I can imagine going and sitting down and being, gosh, I don't know what to say. What do I tell my loved ones? And so these two message banking templates can be really beneficial for whenever you are starting to think about what you would want to say in your message banking. There was a study done that a journal can help make things much more manageable. Okay, so I have our poll results back. So have you completed voice or message banking? 29% said yes. I am so proud of y'all. We beat the statistic of that 10 to 15%. 63 said no, and then 8% said I didn't know I needed to. So we're also going to have some more reference to voice banking at the end of our presentation, and I have lots of links for y'all to use. So next I want to talk about low tech or no tech AAC. In the chat, my team is going to put a link to our communication boards. These communication boards are free to print online, and there's several different types depending on what type of communication you use, and they all have the how to use them on the back of them. But one thing that I would note is that low tech and no tech really matters. Even if you have the best high-tech system, there's going to be times when you cannot use that fancy high-tech system. And so also remembering that AAC includes things like gestures, facial expressions, and there's times when we cannot use our high-tech AAC, like whenever you're in the shower or bathroom. There's even times whenever you're, transferring via patient lift or in a car where you may not have access, and it may be good to have an alternative backup. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to use these communication boards. So one thing you want to do is position the board within reach or line of sight, making sure that you use whatever system works best for you. So that includes eye gaze, pointing, a laser pointer, or even partner-assisted scanning. We're going to drop a video in the link. I don't have time to play it for y'all today, but it's really great, of someone using a communication board system. One thing I want to say is that tips for success is making sure that you have multiple boards in multiple locations. So you wouldn't want to get stuck somewhere without your board that you need. Always confirm selections. As an occupational therapist, I have gone down a rabbit hole of not understanding what someone meant to say to me because I didn't confirm their selection. Instead of saying I need, it was I want, and I'm trying to think of all the things they could possibly need, and they're like, no, that's not what I meant to say to you. So making sure that we always confirm selections is really important. And then also training caregivers and family members, anyone who may interact and have to use these. I want to talk about some other communication options. That includes a boogie board. Boogie boards are essentially a pen and a paper always available to you. The nice thing is that it's reusable, it's low effort, they're lightweight, they don't require charging, and it's nice for someone who still has some handwriting to be able to write down messages when speech may be difficult. There's also something called a voice amplifier, which helps boost a person's natural voice, making it easier to be heard without strain. They're helpful in early stages of ALS when speech is soft but still intelligible, and it helps reduce fatigue and improve communication, especially in noisy environments. So next we're going to talk about light tech AAC. That includes tablets, apps, and phones. The great thing about our technology today is that there's a lot of things that are available off the shelf. The fact that my phone can do so much nowadays is amazing. This helps bridge the gap between low tech and high tech communication. And you could use simple technology like tablets and apps that are readily available. I think it allows a lot more flexibility for people who can still access touchscreens, who may still have some hand movement. They are more affordable than other options. And I have a lot of really great apps that I'm going to show you. I'm going to tell you that there are a million more out there. These are just the common ones that my team sees. So we have popular apps with the links here. We're going to drop these links in the chat as well. So we have Predictable, Prolo Q4, Grid, Speech Assistant. All of these do different things. So it kind of depends on what your speech language pathologist recommends for you. But these are all great options that are available through the App Store. Some are free and some are not. And so know that free options are available out there. And then I want to talk about apps for voice preservation. I know we've already talked about voice preservation, but making your voice preservation work with your device is also a big thing. So these are some of the apps that we're also going to drop in the chat so that you know kind of what's going on. I also want to add that you'll have these slides available with all these links at the end because I just want to give you guys as much information as possible. So you will have all of this. If you didn't quite get to it in the chat, don't worry. These are all going to be available as well at the end. So I have another poll here. Who here uses their smartphone accessibility features? And the answers are, I use some of them, I would like to learn more, and then technology seems scary. While y'all answer that, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about accessibility and why it's important to have these light tech options or these apps. So there's this thing called Steve's Way, which is completely ALS based on accessibility for iPhones. We could drop that link in the chat as well. But one of the biggest things is that over 90% of AAC apps are available on iOS. So that makes a tablet a great solution for ALS. Light tech AAC options are often 70 to 80% less expensive than a speech generating device. And this, again, makes it a cost-effective alternative. Accessibility options often are not as robust in AAC devices. So do remember that your iPhone does have head tracking and does have things like eye gaze, but it's not going to be a dedicated eye gaze system because iPhone is not that system. So a long-term AAC device would be the best option. It's not meant to replace it, but it is meant to supplement it. One thing I would also add is always trial a new accessibility feature with someone who may have more access to touch. There's nothing more frustrating than getting into a menu and not being able to get out with the accessibility features as you're learning. So I would always learn with someone who may be able to jump in and touch the phone if you are not able to. So out of the poll, who here uses their smartphone accessibility features? 36% of y'all use some of them. 55% would like to learn more, and then 8% says technology seems scary. And I would like to both teach you more, and I would also like to make you feel more confident so that technology does not seem as scary. So let's talk a little bit about accessibility features. There are built-in access methods. This, of course, is Android-based. Android and iPhone both have different operating systems like we spoke about. Android accessibility links will be dropped in the chat, but Ultimately, I would know that Android is a little bit more flexible on not all features are always included on Android devices, but as long as you've been able to upgrade your iPhone, then that is not true of iPhone. iPhone has all accessibilities as long as you have the newest updated version. So these are some access methods. So there's a talkback screen reader, camera switches that you could use facial expressions or eye movement to perform like a scan and select option. There's accessibility options where you can make larger on-screen menus. Voice access and Google Assistant are also available. Live caption, expressive captions. There's lots out there. My question would be more of what do you want your phone to do, not can my phone do it for me? And then when we get to iPhone accessibility options, so there's voice control, switch control, which are pretty standard, being able to use an external switch to help select things. But there's also head tracking and ways that you could change your keyboard. So if you are still typing, but you're making some mistakes here and there, then you could still change your keyboard to sometimes have like instead of accidentally pressing, the Y twice, it would automatically erase that duplication. And you can modify any keyboard behavior to avoid accidental input. There's also like ways that you would just make a very simplified menu too. So if you're just using your phone for a couple of things, you can make those icons larger, you can make your text larger. I would say again, it's not what does this phone do? It's more of what do you need it to do, and it probably does it. So next we're going to be talking about more complex solutions like speech generating devices. So my next poll is who has already spoken to their team about a speech generating device? And this is yes and no. Well, y'all answer that. I want to go ahead and tell you again that stat of 80 to 95% of people with ALS eventually need some sort of AAC. Most benefit from a speech generating device as speech declines. Average time from referral to device delivery is typically 6 to 12 weeks, but that can vary pretty significantly. And early referral really matters. So people who start AAC before severe speech loss have higher success rate and less frustration. And again, eye gaze is used by about 70% of ALS clients who received a speech generating device. So let's go ahead and check those polls and see who's already spoken to their team. 44% of y'all said yes, you have already spoken to their team about a speech generating device. And then 56% said no. So let's talk about what that looks like when you speak to your team. So there are kind of three components of how AAC works. And I want you to think about it as like a math problem. So access methods plus hardware plus software equals communication. So access methods can include lots of things like touch or switches, which are specialized devices that can bring things closer to you that you could hit with like your head, your elbow, your finger, your foot, you name it. There's head tracking and there's eye tracking. And then of course there's voice control. And then you have your hardware. Your hardware is your iPad or your tablet, your eye gaze camera. Again, those switches can also be some hardware and then mounts and stands because you have to have your device close to you in order to be able to access it. And then we have software. We've already spoken a lot about apps that are available out there. There's built-in software into a lot of these programs, but there's also supplemental software and apps that you can download. And these all need to work together in order to create an AAC system. Eye gaze is the most common, right? We're going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat to a blog that was written completely with eye gaze technology. And I loved this blog. I loved reading it because it talks about how her communication evolved from typing to voice to text, then to head mouse, and then eventually to eye gaze. And I love it too because she's very real about some of the barriers that she comes into on a daily basis when using these eye gaze systems. She talks about her frustrations, but she also talks about how meaningful it is for her to have a device and how it has helped her communication. So when we talk about eye gaze, we say, what is that? It's whenever you use your eyes to essentially as a cursor to like look at the screen and select objects. So your eyes turn into your mouse essentially, and it allows you to communicate, browse, and control devices with just your eyes. And like I said, about 70% of people need some sort of eye gaze device. So because of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to optimize eye gaze. So I have several tips on how to make sure that eye gaze is set up correctly for you. The biggest thing probably would be positioning. Again, if my device is not within the correct kind of distance from me, which is typically 18 to 24 inches, then I'm not going to be able to select items with my eyes. Also, we want to make sure that you're not moving around a lot, because if you're moving, then it's hard for your device to pick up where your eyes are and where you're looking. Lighting really matters. So you don't want strong backlights, meaning like you don't want to sit with windows behind you because it may pick up on the lighting. You want to use a consistent soft lighting and reduce shadows around the eyes. And then if you're like me and you wear glasses, you want to make sure that your glasses are cleaned regularly. You want to remove any reflective surfaces around the area. We also want to start with a full calibration. So calibrating a device just means simply looking at the dots. Usually each one has like little focus areas and it starts to pick up where you're looking. And then recalibrate if you change positions. A lot of times we want to start with a full calibration of 9 points, especially if you're using something like a keyboard. You can probably get away with 5 points if you're not using certain keyboards, but we like at least 9 points, meaning that you look at 9 different objects whenever you're starting your device to calibrate. Also, eye health and comfort is really important. Sometimes glasses can get in the way. I know Reagan was telling me recently about someone she was working with where the frames of the glasses were just not able to pick up her eye movements. So again, making sure that you're cleaning your glasses regularly, but also knowing that eye drops can be your friend. So in that blog that we dropped in the chat, I also want to add that, she talks about how like your eyes, just a slight change in how glossy they are can change everything. Also talk to your doctor about need for eye drops as well, because that can be very beneficial. There's software settings, and I think this is a huge part of what we think of whenever we're introducing someone to eye gaze systems. So dwell means whenever I look at something, in order for it to click, I have to look at something and stare at it for however many seconds. You want to adjust that time on how confident you are with using a machine. So someone who's using a machine a lot doesn't need a long dwell time, or else they're just going to sit there and be frustrating. And they cannot go to the next thing. So if you're typing something, you want to make sure that it's the correct dwell time. You also want to enable a pause or a sleep mode so that you could rest. And then the biggest thing is just practice. I expect that someone's going to be frustrated with technology the first time that they use it. Unfortunately, this is just something that happens, but start with really simple tasks and then gradually move on. My biggest piece of advice is run your updates for your device at least weekly. Please. These Windows updates are often weekly. You need to keep it updated and healthy so that then later on you can be able to use your eye gaze system effectively. Access does not only include eye gaze, right? And access is just as important as a device. So a lot of times you could use multiple points of access. So you can use something like an eye gaze and a switch for selection. A lot of times that can be faster if you have the movement. A switch, as you can see up in the top corner, I included this is a pillow switch, which is a nice soft switch. There's things called micro light switches. So if you only have a little bit of movement, you don't have to press very hard. There's a million types of switches out there. There's foot switches, bite switches, cheek, right? You can name a switch and they've probably made it. And then there's also a head mouse or head mice. It's hard, duplicates. So a head mouse is something you would put on, and it's a gyroscope, and it would control where your head's moving, and that would move the mouse. And this is an example of one with a bite switch. There's also joysticks or trackballs that you can get. And so these are for someone with some upper limb movement. And essentially what it does is it creates a mouse, but is a little bit easier for you to access so that you can scroll and still access your systems. I also want to talk about mounts. Mounts are just as important as device. Without the right mount, even the best device in the whole entire world will fail because you need to make sure that you have something nice, safe, and stable and reliable for you to use your eye gaze system. So there's lots of different types of mounts: wheelchair, rolling floor mounts, desk or table mounts, switch and accessory mounts. There's lots of different types of mounts out there. My biggest thing would make sure that it's nice and stable and that you have ones for all different positions. So if you're using a wheelchair, you likely need a wheelchair mount and a rolling floor mount for when you're in bed because you're not always going to be in your wheelchair. I also briefly want to talk about environmental controls. I can do a whole nother presentation on environmental controls, so I will be brief. But essentially, you can use your devices in order to control the environment. Examples of this are lights, lamps, TV and entertainment systems, thermostats, doors, windows, phone calls. You can have access to your environment through these same kind of means of whether it be eye gaze, switch, whatever access you have. Next, I want to go ahead and get into obtaining a speech generating device. So, one of the biggest things to remember is that you will want to start this process as early as possible. It does take, I will say, vendors say it takes 4 to 8 weeks. We find that it takes probably a little bit longer out in the wild in the real world, but I would say give 2 to 3 months. This process is pretty in-depth. It starts with a speech therapist evaluation. Sometimes it could take a little while to get that evaluation done. From the time you have that evaluation, then they have to create a whole entire long prescription and have the doctor sign it of every reason you will need the speech generating device. And then they submit for insurance review. Insurance takes their sweet time looking over it, and then once you get that approval, then they deliver the device. Because there's so many different steps for this process can be drawn out. And so I want to encourage people to do things early and often. One thing to note is that early AAC referral before a severe speech decline improves communication and reduces frustration. On average, referral occurs 6 to 12 months after symptom onset. But research has shown that best results come within 3 months of diagnosis. And one thing to remember is that for your speech language pathologist to write a need of this device, it's really important to think about your worst day. It's really important to think about how you can access, your life whenever you're really tired or whenever your voice doesn't quite work for you. Because when you go and see a speech language pathologist for an evaluation, they will often write what you can do. And if it's a good day, that may not be representative of all of the struggles you are having. And that can be really helpful to tell insurance as well. So my next poll is, who feels confident they could learn how to use a speech generating device? So I'm going to go ahead and have us launch this poll while I tell you a little bit about how important it is to have support and education when it comes to AAC and communication devices. So, one of the studies followed people for 4 years, about 50 people, and they looked at all of the people who accepted AAC and who didn't. And so 96% of participants accepted AAC, 90% immediately accepted AAC. The 6% had some after some delay, and only about 4% rejected AAC technology entirely. So one of the big things to note is that in this study, people didn't discontinue use. Once they started using their device, they continued using it throughout their time. But if someone was slow to accept or rejected it, usually it was just about timing, perceived benefit, physical ability, and then some emotional factors. So the study really emphasized that early introduction and good support are incredibly important. Delays in referral or use of speech therapy may impact when AAC is adopted. So this question is, who feels confident that they can learn to use a speech generating device? And 15% said, I'm using one and already feel confident. I'm so happy to hear that. 38% says, I feel prepared and confident to learn when the time comes. And then 33% said, I'm a little nervous. And 14% said, I'm not sure yet. So we're going to talk about support and education next so that you can feel prepared whenever the time comes. This is a study that looked at the support, and I think the support is really clear when you look at use of AAC devices. So this said that 46% of the 113 people received support from their speech language pathologist, their SLP. The speech language pathologist is the blue bar in these charts, and then the ALS Association or other nonprofit is the orange bar. And so one thing I want to talk about a little bit later is how the ALS Association can help support you and provide education. But one thing to note is that another large handful of how to use the device comes from family members and friends, device representatives or app representatives. And then also note that service providers need to provide around 5 hours of training and ongoing support for troubleshooting in order for users to feel really qualified to use their device in a multitude of situations. I want to talk a little bit about communicating with an AAC user and some things to keep in mind. First, I want to talk and say that you really need to learn someone's preferences. So it is okay to ask someone like what their preferences are and how you like to communicate with them and what works best. Respect the effort that it takes. Be patient. Minimize distractions. Background noise can be really difficult. Make sure you look at the person and not the AAC device. And try to share the conversation. Acknowledge that this is really difficult. If you want to try a free eye gaze device on your computer that just uses your webcam, we're going to go ahead and drop that into the chat. One thing we're going to talk about next is I would try the device yourself too. AAC use is associated with a significant improvement in perceived social participation and emotional well-being, meaning that people who use AAC just have overall quality of life and emotional changes whenever they use this in a positive way. But also acknowledge that it takes a lot of work for someone to use an AAC device. So next I have some tips for caregivers in communication. So try the device yourself. I think every caregiver should try using a device and understand what it takes to use one of these devices. And that's why we're going to drop in the chat that link so you could try it yourself on your computer. Definitely know that it is important for caregivers to promote independence with AAC. If you always speak for someone or you know what they're saying before they work, they may not get the chance to actually say what they were meaning. But do know that use of AAC does help enhance relationships. Maintaining communication is just so important. And caregiver burden actually decreases when speech generating devices are implemented early because communication can remain possible despite what's going on physically. Here, I'm going to pause and just allow for some people who may want to ask questions in the chat, making sure that you're continuing to ask questions as we talk a little bit about support systems that are available for you. Knowing that if you're using a speech generating device or an eye gaze device, it may just take a little bit longer. We're going to get to questions here soon. I just have a couple more slides to go over. So I want to first talk about our independence and mobility program within the ALS Association. I have a QR code here, and we're going to drop a link in the chat about all of the programs that we offer, including the independence and mobility program. This offers AAC, which we've talked about extensively today, also our durable medical equipment, virtual home assessments, and our RAMP program. These are subject to availability in your area, but take a look online. You could see that we have access to some of these services already. And let's talk about some of your supports that you can lean into. So my AAC monster is back, and he's here to tell you that AAC shouldn't be scary if we use your supports. We have our speech language pathologist. This is going to be your primary resource for communication and strategies. We also have your ALS Association Care Services Coordinator, which will help you connect to local and national resources. This is where I say family and caregivers provide daily assistance and help reinforce communication strategies. And you could see our AAC friend turns into a friendly guy talking about Bridging Voice, which is one of our partners that we work with that offers technical support and device troubleshooting remotely. Amazing organization with so many resources. Also, Team Gleason assists with funding and equipment, and the ALS Association AAC team, which you've been chatting with Reagan and Jill today, also help provide guidance on equipment and voice preservation. There's also free resources out there, eye gaze systems that you could use for free. We're going to drop these in the chat. And one thing I want to encourage is that if you have a family member who's willing to help, who may be very techie, there's also ways to remote log into your devices, and you don't have to be an AAT or like a IT person in order to do this. So you can give request via FaceTime to your apps, and someone can remote in and organize your phone in a way. There's also the same thing with Windows called Quick Assist. And then in Zoom, there's a similar way, and I have all of the resources here on how to do that. Lastly, I just want to talk about my AAC team. We are a mighty team of 4 throughout the country with the ALS Association, and we are here to help with troubleshooting, so support with device setup or access methods. We have loaner devices, again, subject to availability, but we do have a loan closet that we are able to provide for people facing insurance issues. And then also just our biggest thing that we probably do is referral and education support. So we can connect you to your speech language pathologist, funding resources, and then also helping with remote AAC services. And I'd say if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at aac@als.org. So I want to go ahead and open up questions. I know Amber's going to pop back on.
Hey, wow, that was really a lot of information. It was wonderful. I know we covered a ton. So thank you so much to Haley and also to Jill and Reagan. I saw them working really hard in the chat, so I appreciate them as well. If you have not submitted your questions and you still have one, please go ahead and you can submit that via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're not able to access that, go ahead and pop it in the chat. I know the big question that came up was, will all of these resources be available? And the question to that is yes. All of these links that have been coming up, they'll be available once our presentation is uploaded. The recording is uploaded to our website. There will also be a PDF version of the slides. And I'm pretty sure that the end of those will have resources that you can click into. So you'll be able to get all of these wonderful links. So I'm going to go, I know Jill's been kind of keeping track of questions in the chat, and so I'm going to let her jump on with Haley and go ahead and get some questions answered.
Great. Yeah, there were some really good questions that I felt like would be great for you to answer live, Haley, because I think a lot of people might be interested in the answer. So the first was from Deborah or from Grace asking about troubleshooting for getting an SGD if because she is in an area where she found, and you did kind of address this that if she was told that if she couldn't get a device unless she had no hands and no voice. So that it does feel extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear this often. I think a lot of it is your speech language pathologist and the verbiage that they use within the documentation. And I do think talking about your worst day is really important because they may take some measurements that can prove that you can use your hands, but can you use your hands all the time, right? Same with your voice and your speech. I do hear this very often about, this guideline that we have to be completely without your voice or completely without your hands in order to use your device. And I would say that I would push back on that and absolutely talk about when you need your device, how it's important. Um, I also think that it's really important to think about um, like emergencies and document that. As a speech language pathologist, I would like ask for them to document those things as well. Um, and then the biggest thing is just finding a speech language pathologist sometimes can be difficult. And so ALS Association your care service navigator can also help you find a speech language pathologist. There are some restrictions. Sometimes these can be done virtually depending on what type of insurance you have and where you live. So they can sometimes virtually come in and assess for a speech language or for a speech generating device, but sometimes not. And so it really varies by area. Some regulation requires that you live in like a rural area and like how do we, describe a rural area? So there's definitely a lot of barriers, unfortunately, out there. But I think lean on your resources to help figure out who to talk to in your certain circumstance.
And then I think we have a nicely related question about are all of these devices that we're talking about covered by insurance? And of course, that's a nuanced answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So, AAC devices. So we think about like these are the big devices. These are the Tobii Dynavox, the Forbes, some of the, dedicated eye gaze or AAC devices. They should be covered by insurance. There's definitely nuance there of yes, you do have to have medical need. With a diagnosis of ALS, I think we can usually justify that with the correct speech language pathologist to say this is the need, right? Think about your worst day, all of that. But a lot of times we also think about the stuff that you need to help support it. So a lot of times insurance only pays for one mount. Well, you need two. You likely will need a wheelchair at some point. So you need a floor mount and a wheelchair mount. And so talking with your speech language pathologist and also talking with the ALS Association on who can help bridge those gaps if you do only have one insurance funded amount through your insurance. Things like light tech AAC are often not covered by insurance. Insurance, unfortunately, is not going to pay for a phone. But knowing that there are some free apps and some free resources out there if you do have any gaps can be a great way to help in the meantime.
Great. And then another one that I'm sure is on the mind of more people than just Brad, but Brad asked about options for eye gaze with iPads.
Yes. So I will say I haven't dug into it too much. I'm sure my team has much more, but I've heard that the head tracking um, can be hit or miss on the iOS devices, which is the iPads and the iPhones. However, I suggest trying it out. There's also eye gaze devices on like your computer as well. The free versions are the ones that are built in, are not going to be as robust as, again, one of those big AAC devices that we typically recommend, but they can help bridge the gap in the meantime. And so we dropped some links in the chat about some free versions out there as well.
And I think probably I didn't share that as well as I should have that because I did share that there's also companies do now make eye gaze devices that are based on the iOS or iPad platform, but they're just newer than
Yeah.
the Windows-based eye gaze
Yeah.
access options.
Yeah.
And I hope that I have saved everybody's either answered in the chat or at least shared them verbally. If not, let me know what I've missed.
I see one that says, I'm already losing my voice. Can I get voice banking? And so, one of the things to remember is that there are options. Voice banking, remember the three types there's voice preservation, which is the overall umbrella. Voice banking is where your voice is right now. And so, if you're already starting to lose your voice, but you haven't lost it, or you don't think there's been that many changes, you could go ahead and do voice banking. But there are other options as well, such as the voice cloning that we showed the video of someone using their AI voice. So there's definitely options out there for you if you've not done your voice banking yet.
I just saw a question come through about how AAC features might work when a user is on a BiPAP mask.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm sure, again, my team could probably answer this a little bit better than I can, but I know there shouldn't be any interference, but sometimes, again, the smallest little thing can sometimes pick up. The eye gaze device should pick up your eyes. So things that occlude your eyes are probably more likely to cause interference. So things like glasses, sunglasses, those types of things. But if you're having any difficulty calibrating and you're thinking that your BiPAP is really the thing that's troubling or causing that issue, I would definitely talk to your speech language pathologist or your representative of whatever device it is and let them know. Because I mean, we've problem solved the silliest things that you wouldn't believe that are the thing causing your eye gaze system not to pick up your eyes. Jill was telling me a story of someone who had like a wind chime outside a window that was reflecting off of a mirror and then would sometimes, pick up on a device. So I'd say like it's not out of the question that it could be interfering, but as long as your eyes are well lit up and not interfering, then I would definitely say, definitely. I'm reading some of Lisa as well has joined us and using low residue paper tape over the shiny spots on your BiPAP might help for calibration. And so definitely resources out there. I'd say talk to someone if you're having any difficulty. It's probably not you, it probably is the machine, and we could probably problem solve something to help with you in the meantime.
And yes, Deborah, I see your comment that it's overwhelming and it is so much information, but take it in bite-sized chunks and exactly reach out if you have questions. That is exactly what we're here for. That's what your care team is here for. So I hear you, but you're not alone.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I think we might have gotten everyone's questions answered, everyone that I see. And I know Reagan was working overtime answering questions as well. So thank you both. Keep in mind that this webinar recording will be available in about a week on our website, as will those slides with the links. And you're also welcome to use that webpage to view any of our past webinars. You can also sign up for future webinars through that same spot. I hope you'll join us again for our next installment of our Empowering Your ALS webinar series, ALS Journey webinar series, which will be on Tuesday, January 27th. And that webinar will be on the ALS Clinic Advisor, which is a tool using patient experience data to share reviews. And don't forget, there will be a short survey that'll pop up on your screen when this webinar ends, and we would love to hear from you. Your feedback is so very important to us. So I want to say one final thank you to Haley and Jill and Reagan. This was just an incredible presentation and a really helpful topic. So, and thank you all to have that those of you that have joined us. And I hope we will see you again at the next one.
Thanks, y'all.